Hi everyone, welcome to Advanced Houseplant Care. My name is Kristen Topping and I own an online houseplant business called Sweet Life Flora. We're going to be opening a store in Moncton very soon. So this is all things houseplants that's above and beyond the very basics you need to just keep your plant alive. So we're going to go into looking at light, looking at how to make different soils. We're also going to look at propagation and pests. So lots of different things to cover. I don't even go nearly into the depth that I'd like to on this stuff, but that's because I'm a super houseplant geek. I'd also like to congratulate you on taking the Advancing Skills in Therapeutic Horticulture course. The more of us there are that are, qualified and trained as therapeutic horticulture practitioners, the better it will be, and the more clients will be able to see and help. And we just got to get the word out there that horticulture therapy is just another a domain that you can use for self-care and also for healing. So without further ado, this is Advanced Houseplant Care. A little bit about me first. I got involved in therapeutic horticulture because of something that happened to me. So a little bit of background. I'm an engineer. I am an author. I'm a 22-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, and I'm a concussion survivor. So minor traumatic brain injuries are the exact reason why I got into therapeutic horticulture, and also because I know that the veteran community needs other outlets for how they can use horticulture in their self-care. They don't even think about it. So in 2016, I had a traumatic brain injury from a roller coaster ride, and I lost a whole lot of who I was. I lost a lot of my sense of self. I lost my purpose. And I lost a lot of skills that I had before. So you know how they talk about executive functions, things like problem solving, or even using your hand-eye coordination, communicating clearly, but also managing your relationships, managing your emotions, knowing where your body is in time and space. All of those executive functions were limited in my world. So I hit rock bottom. I was depressed. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life because the military, they realized that I couldn't do my job as an engineer anymore. And I was not physically fit enough to be in the Canadian Forces. So I had to figure out what that was going to mean for me. So I went into rehab, and they kept saying, well, you need to find a hobby. You need to do this. You need to do that. And all of those things will help you get all your executive functions back. It doesn't 100% work that way. So I ended up looking at my plants, and I started really taking care of my plants. And when I realized that I could take care of my plants, even though I couldn't take care of myself, I knew that I'd found something that could contribute to my rehabilitation. So that's it. I started thinking about how I could mindfully incorporate horticulture into my self-care routine. And I found that as I'm taking care of my plants, I'm in the moment. Whether or not that's on purpose or not, whether I'm focused on it, I have to be focused on it, and I have to be mindful about it so that I know that my plant is getting everything that it needs. You can even think of taking care of yourself as a really good analog to that. And that's why I find that therapeutic horticulture was life-changing for me. It allowed me to get back to being more of who I was, even though who I was wasn't entirely something that I could have as a goal anymore. I needed to grow, and I needed to figure out something else. Couldn't be an engineer, couldn't be in the military, but I can take care of plants. So what does that mean for me? I started a business called Sweet Life Flora in 2019. Technically 2018, so it's our 5-year anniversary. So therapeutic horticulture has gotten me to a place where I'm finally happy with who I am, and I am even proud of who I am. And I opened a business. We mostly sell online, but the winter of 2024, I'm going to be opening a store in Moncton. So there's been some crazy big things that have been happening, but I'm super excited to share everything that I've learned throughout this journey. And I call myself a defender and educator of plant parents worldwide. Basically, that means that on social media, especially Instagram and TikTok, I spend a lot of my time educating people on how to properly take care of their houseplants. So we've got everything all lined up, ready to go, and this is going to be your lesson in advanced houseplant care. So we're going to cover 4 things today that I consider above and beyond basic houseplant care. It could be any houseplant, but you know that they need water, they need light, and they need a way to have a place that's secure for them to grow, which means that you have to provide those things for them. We also need to fertilize as well. But these next topics are things that I think are above and beyond all that. Things that I think will make you a better plant parent overall. So the first one, actually if we go back one, the first one is soil is a misnomer. And then after that, we're going to look at propagating plants, then go into light, and then look at how we can use nature to actually solve problems as they come up in our plant parenthood journey. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about soil as a misnomer. So there are 3 things that you have to do when you buy a new and healthy plant from the store. First of all, you have to understand that this plant comes from a greenhouse environment. Can you provide a greenhouse environment? Most of us can't say yes. So when you do your research, you're going to determine the best sunlight conditions, humidity, and you're going to understand its watering needs. Another question you might want to ask is whether the soil that it's in right now, how recently it was repotted. The next thing, I cannot mention this even more than enough, is quarantine, quarantine, quarantine. You want to set your new plant apart from any other plants just in case it has bacteria, virus, or fungal disorder, or it has pests. If you don't have a separate room to quarantine in, that's not a problem at all. You can use a large Ziploc baggie or even a clear opaque bin to keep your plant separate while you identify whether it has pests or disease. Now, you may even need to treat for pests when it's in quarantine, but you want to for sure know that your plant is pest or disease free for at least 2 weeks before you put it in with the rest of your collection. So over those next couple of weeks that you're quarantining, you need to figure out what soil will be best. Is it a succulent? Is it a tropical? Each of these have different soil needs. You can always direct message me if you have any questions about soil. And now, before we get into the nitty-gritty about what soil means when it comes to houseplants, it's also important to point out that when you get a new plant baby from a nursery or greenhouse or store, don't repot it right away, because you only want to change one thing in the plant's environment at a time. So you don't know if the soil might be the problem. So if you have pests, you're going to want to treat those pests first. If you have a disease, you're going to want to treat the disease first before you even mess around with its light conditions, its humidity, or its soil. So the definition of soil. So the definition of soil is the upper layer of earth in which plants grow. It's usually a black or dark brown material, typically consisting of a mixture of organic remains, clay, and rock particles. So dirt and what soil is different no matter where you are in the world. So they're going to have a different mixture of those organic components as well as the clay and the rock particles. So we really can't, it's not safe for us to take dirt from outside and bring it in, because it might have pests, it might have other problems like heavy metal toxicity or exposure to pesticides or things like that. So we need to make our own soil. And we want to make sure that we're mimicking the natural environment as much as possible. So we have to respect the differences that come with an indoor environment. So what we can use instead to make our soil that we're going to pot with, usually these are non-soil mixtures. So there isn't even any inkling of something that came from the outside brought in. So we use a base of something called coconut coir. Yeah, it's the outside of the coconut that has been shaved up into tiny little bits, and they're brown, and that's what looks like the soil in most of the prepackaged soils that you can find at like Canadian Tire or a greenhouse or a nursery. Coconut coir is usually the base. Now, in order to improve the drainage, depending on what type of plant you have, you can use perlite, you can use vermiculite. All of these are natural products, even though it's debatable as to whether they're renewable or not. But you can also use sand. Now, sand is something that I like to use when I'm planting succulents, for instance, because it very closely resembles the environment from which they come from. So usually a desert-like environment. Now, if you want to improve water retention, you can add different types of bark. Fir or pine bark are best, and usually you can find it in a mix called orchid bark, because they use it as a substrate for orchids. Substrate is just what you're planting your plant in. It can be anything from the soil the non-soil potting mix that we're making here. It could be sphagnum moss, it could be anything like that, or just bark even. We like to use one of these mixtures though. So for retaining water, you can use that bark I just talked about, or you can add in some sphagnum moss, but it's very important that you consider where that sphagnum moss came from. If it came from somewhere that has a renewable farming operation for sphagnum moss, like in New Zealand, then you've got good sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss that comes from North America generally isn't sustainably harvested. Now, for fertilizers, we often recommend putting a slow-release fertilizer into a mix when you're first repotting. Now, a slow-release fertilizer can be a chemical fertilizer, or it can be organic, like compost or worm castings or something like that. And if you want some disease prevention, now this isn't going to prevent all diseases. It will mostly just prevent against waterborne diseases. You can put in some activated charcoal, which will act as a kind of like a filter for any, bad stuff that comes in with the water. You've probably also heard that you can grow indoor plants using semi-hydroponics, or even just in water, and it's true. But when you use something like leca, which is light expanded clay aggregate, pon, or stratum, stratum's the stuff you use in a fish filter. You're really going to want to make sure that you understand how to regulate pH in aquatic environments, but also how to add nutrients in without messing with the pH. So it becomes a bit of complicated chemistry if you don't want to use a solid, non-soil based potting mixture. Because with the potting mixture, we have a little less wiggle room. All right, so that's soil, not soil. It's a soilless mixture that we're going to use for tropical houseplants. Now we're going to talk about different propagation techniques. So if you look at seeds, yes, technically all tropical plants and all plants except for ferns will produce seeds, but they won't get pollinated without help in our indoor environment. So if you have a production greenhouse, propagation by seed is easy because you have the space, the tools, the conditions, and often the education to control pollination. So technically, all houseplants can be propagated by seed, but there are some where it's a little easier than others. So things like anthuriums, coleus, which you often think of as an outdoor plant, lithops, hypoestes, adenium, which is a succulent, or African violets can all be propagated from seed. But as indoor houseplants, there are easier ways to do it. And the next 4 methods we're going to talk about are ways that are easier for houseplant propagation. The next is division. So you've probably divided outdoor plants before, especially ones that are perennials that keep going every single year. So dividing houseplants is exactly what you think it is. It's dividing one plant into 2 or more plants. And the best time to divide your houseplants is in spring, because they've already come out of their rest period, which is standard for any plant that exists as a foliage plant year-round. They have a rest period when it's colder out. And in the spring, they're ready to start growing again. So the easiest plants to divide are those that naturally produce offsets. So offsets are the tiny little babies that will come out from the bottom of the soil, from the base of the plant through the root system. So plants like spider plants or sansevieria are really great for that. Also, peace lilies, any other type of plant that grows from a bulb like azizi, sansevierias and ferns are also really good as well. The next way that you can do it is by rooting from a leaf. So this requires you to make sure that you have a sharp knife, because you're going to want to make sure that you're cutting the leaf of the plant as cleanly as possible from the stem. You want to make sure that nothing is left behind in the process, and you want to let the leaf dry out for a couple of hours up to a day to allow for cutting of the cutting to scab over. This will prevent any bacteria, fungi, viral diseases from getting into the plant before you're going to use it to propagate. So you're going to want to take that clean cut from the mother plant, and then you're going to let the cut scab over. You're going to dip the tip of the leaf into rooting hormone and then insert it into some fresh potting soil. Or you can put it on top of like a moist bed of sphagnum moss. But you're going to make sure that you're growing roots before you transition it to potting soil again later, or potting mixture. You want to make sure the leaf is pointing out of the soil in the direction that it grows. And then you can gently press the potting mix around the stem. So some plants that are really good for this are begonias. Now, begonias, you're going to actually want to take the leaf off, and then you're going to want to flip it upside down and cut along the veins. It's from the veins where the roots will grow for begonias. Now, you've also got ZZ plants, sansevierias that you can do this with. Sansevierias take a very, very long time. Well, sansevierias and ZZs take a very, very long time to actually grow roots. Succulents, they're the easiest ones, and they're some of the most satisfying ones to propagate from a leaf cutting. Because you almost have 100% success as long as you, A, don't water too much, or B, don't water enough. So there's like this fine line you have to hit. The next 2 ways are very similar to each other. The first one is actually taking cuttings. So this is the easiest way and probably the most common way to propagate houseplants. Now, tropical houseplants. So succulents, again, you're always going to want to try to root from that leaf. But if you have tropicals or even subtropicals, these are ones that are going to have nodes, or a place where you're going to cut below. And now a node is where there's like a bump on the stem, and that bump has the potential to produce roots, leaves, or both from that spot. So you're going to want to cut below one of those nodes, and it may already have a leaf coming out of it. You never know. Or it may already have a root coming out of it in the case of some of your more common aroids like philodendrons and monstera. But you're going to cut below the node. Some of the ones that are very easy to do this with are pothos. Now, pothos are amazing because pothos actually have a water-soluble rooting hormone that runs through the entire pothos. So when you make that cut, all of a sudden you're able to release that rooting hormone into the water or into whatever medium you're putting your cutting into, and it will help any other cuttings grow. So if you're having problems producing roots through water propagation, for instance, where you're going to put the cutting into a vial of water, you may just want to put in another cutting of pothos, and that will help it grow because of the rooting hormone that's inherently in the plant. So pothos are great. The actual name of pothos is epipremnum. Pothos is just a common name. Aglaonema, Jaciana, philodendrons, Dieffenbachia, Syngonium, and Monstera. And a lot of these ones you'll notice come from the same, overarching tropical plant family called Araceae or aroids, which is a common community term that you'll hear with other houseplant collectors. So aroid. These are the most common houseplants as well. So cutting them and being able to root them out and share them with your friends is the best way to grow your plant collection. Now, if you're using an older aroid, or you have a mature plant where the stalks have become woody, which is a natural process for your plants, you can use something called air layering before you actually cut it off. Now, I have a picture here, and I'm going to show you what's happening in that picture. So air layering is great for more mature plants. All of those ones that were cut above, that we used in cuttings, you can also air layer them first. So basically you're going to put some damp sphagnum moss around a node. As long as the stem hasn't gone woody, you can do this without doing any, manipulating of the plant first. So you can put the damp sphagnum moss around the node and then wrap it in like plastic wrap. And as long as your sphagnum moss stays moist inside the plastic wrap, it will start growing roots from that node. And you'll be able to cut below the air layer in order to repot it without actually hurting the plant, and you're producing a cutting that's already been able to benefit from still being attached to the mother plant. So you're not cutting it off and just popping it into water. You're letting it root while it's still attached to the mother and then cutting it off below. So this works with all of those plants that I talked about in cuttings above, but also any plant like a ficus that is inherently woody. So fiddle-leaf figs, any of your other ficus plants, hibiscus are some examples of ones that are naturally woody. Now, before you propagate one that is inherently woody, like the ficus, what you're going to want to do is do a pre-treatment on the bark. So you're going to actually want to cut off the bark. So you're going to want to score around the edge of where you're going to want to air layer on the stem. So plants that are inherently woody can often get roots from along any part of their stem as long as the bark has been removed. So you're going to remove the bark in a cylinder around the wood where on the stem where you're going to air layer. And then after you've removed that wood, you can also take a notch out of it, and you're going to want to notch it so that it's about 1/3 the way through your plant stem. So remove the bark, make a pie-shaped notch, and then you're going to put in rooting hormone, which you can buy anywhere. You can also buy orchid rooting hormone or a synthetic rooting hormone, super cheap, at a nursery, and you're going to put it inside that little pie-shaped cut you made. That's going to help it kickstart rooting out. And then you're going to put the sphagnum moss around it, the damp sphagnum moss, and put plastic wrap around it again. And now these ones generally take longer to root, so you're going to be looking for it rooting out in about probably 6 weeks to 3 months timeline. The other ones, so your pothos and your monstera, usually take about 2 to 3 weeks before you'll start seeing any significant rooting, but they're a lot faster than ones that are inherently woody. So those are your propagation techniques. Again, there are 5, so you can do it by seed, but there are very few that you'll be able to do at home by seed because you just need the proper environment, the proper training, and the ability to make sure that you're not creating accidental hybrids if that's not your thing. You can do it by division. You can do it by cutting a leaf off and rooting it out from the base of the leaf. You can take cuttings, or before you take cuttings, you can air layer and then take cuttings once it's rooted out. So now we're going to talk about light. So we understand that light is one of the most important things for plants because it goes through a process. Plants go through a process where they take carbon dioxide from the air, as well as nutrients we provide them, the energy from light, and they produce oxygen and glucose, which is the food required for your plants to survive and to maintain that photosynthetic process. So, light provides the energy that plants need to make the food required for them to undergo photosynthesis. Now, the process of photosynthesis allows plants to take carbon dioxide, water, and the energy from light to produce sugar, starches, and other substances, as well as oxygen. So this is why plants are so important for our environment. Photosynthesis can't take place without a chemical called chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is what makes plants green and allows them to absorb light energy to turn it into food. Now, you're going to say, well, Kristen, not all plants are green. And you're right. Not all plants are green, but what you're going to be looking for are shades of green, or places where chlorophyll can be denser in the leaf. So if we look at something like a raven ZZ, this is a very, very black ZZ plant. If you look very closely at the veins on a raven ZZ, the veins are green. What about highly variegated plants? Now, variegation is where you have the genetic disruption of the production of chlorophyll in parts of your plant. So you're going to get plants with white spots on them, like the Monstera albovariegata, which is like the must-have plant of the season. So you're going to get these great big green leaves with these white splotches on them. Well, photosynthesis won't happen if it is pure white. But again, if you look close at that part that's white, the veins will probably still be green, which means some level of photosynthesis will still be taking place in that plant. Now, when we talk about the light that's important for plants, we need to look at the light spectrum, which I have up here. We are all familiar with visible light because it's the spectrum that's broken up and refracted when we see a rainbow. So this is your light that's within the range that's moving at a wavelength between about 350 micrometers all the way up to about 750 micrometers. So it's going, that's the distance between one single wave. So you've got your ultraviolet light. Now, ultraviolet we know is dangerous. So the less it's also dangerous for your plants. So the less exposure you have to UV light, the better your plants will grow. So you want to look for indoor areas where you're getting UV protection from using windows or using screening, but also if you're going to buy grow lights, you want to make sure that you are looking for lights that are visible light only, full spectrum visible light. Let's go into the visible light spectrum. So violet. Violet is a beneficial light color because it helps plants grow and can be used to protect plants from light intensity damage. Now, blue is also beneficial. Blue is beneficial because it helps with the plant's production of chlorophyll. So it's easier for the plant to absorb and use the energy for photosynthesis. So it is especially important for seedlings or young plants that are going through growth spurts because it ensures robust growth for the roots, the stem, and the leaves. Red light is also beneficial. So you see that I've gone from either side of the spectrum. That's because blue and red light are the two most important light wavelengths for plants. So red light is beneficial. It does carry less energy. It's not as effective on its own, but when you combine it with blue light, so about 20% blue light to 80% red light, it's helpful for the growth of mature plants. Now, for younger plants, you're going to want mostly blue, but mature plants, you're going to want mostly red. And it's very convenient because if you look at a rainbow, this stretch of red is bigger than the stretch of blue. So you know that the light that you're producing, that you get outside, is great for mature plants. And now if you notice, blue light will actually travel further through space because it's got higher energy. So therefore, the closer you are to the ground, you're going to get more blue light, which means that you can help with those younger plants or those seedlings. It's all science. I love it. Now, green light, it's mostly inconsequential, but the more access to green light you have, it will make your plants look more beautiful because that green light is reflected in the green of the plant leaves. So your plant will look greener, healthier, and more vibrant. It's actually a greenhouse sales trick. Their light spectrum that they use in their lights has a high proportion of green light in it. That hasn't been filtered. They filtered most other things out. So yellow light is inconsequential. If you remove it if you filter it out, it will produce healthier plants than those growing outside in full spectrum light. Now, if we look at far red light, that's on the other side of the visible spectrum. It's also beneficial, depending on your plant goals. So the outer edge of the visible light spectrum and into the infrared part is good. It's the active phytochromes in plants are what exploit the far red light spectrum. So when your plant is in vegetation, it will be helpful. Artificial lighting that provides far red will trick your plants into thinking that they're in the shade. So they'll elongate their leaves will get wider in an effort to absorb more of the visible spectrum of light. Now, most of the time when you're looking for a plant light, like a grow light, you're not going to look for something that produces a little bit of red and a little bit of blue, meaning the rest has all been filtered out. There are lights that are just red and blue, and that's fine. It's just they don't as closely mimic what you're going to get from the sun. So from the sun, you get something called full spectrum lighting. So it's the best for general houseplant care. Like you're not focusing on seedlings, you're not focusing on the mature ones, but all of your houseplants equally. All right, so now that we know a little bit more about light and the light spectrum and which wavelengths of light are best for plants and in which stages of the plant growth, let's talk about some common or frequently asked questions about light as it applies to houseplants directly. So the first question is, which is better, sunlight or artificial light? So most artificial light on its own doesn't emit as much energy in the red and blue region of the light spectrum as sunlight does. So even if you tailor your artificial lights to push only red and blue, it's a matter of the total energy applied. So how much oomph is that light getting to the leaf with? So as of now, there's not an artificial light powerful enough to provide as much energy to the plants as the sun. It is a big, huge burning star in our universe, so it kind of makes sense. Artificial light is therefore not as effective for plant growth, but in Canada, access to natural light shifts when the seasons shift. So in winter, the days get shorter and the earth tilts on its axis, so the sun rays have to travel farther to get to our side of the planet, meaning the total light intensity will decrease. The cumulative amount of sunlight that your plants will receive in the winter is significantly less than in the summer months. So if we want to keep tropical plants in Canada as indoor plant babies and have them thrive, then we really need to augment our available sunlight with artificial light in order to maintain our plant collections. The next question is, do plants need darkness? So researchers can successfully grow plants using only artificial light in blackout growth chambers. Now, they'll turn the lights on and off in order to simulate darkness. So that's going to be one of the most important things to remember, because while light is necessary for photosynthesis, research shows that regular dark cycles help plants prepare for the following day, much like how sleep rejuvenates us after a long day. So some plants require extended dark periods even to initiate flowering. An example of that would be like the Christmas cactus or the Thanksgiving cactus. They need to be put in the dark before they'll flower. How do I know my plant is getting enough light? So this is where you're going to pay attention to the growth pattern of your plant. So we're going to look for some indicators. So if it's the summer months and you are experiencing no or slow growth, that can be an indicator that your plant isn't getting enough light to photosynthesis the amount that it needs to actually grow. Now, in the winter, this is a bit tricky because most of your plants will go into a dormant phase, which is an absolutely normal part of its life cycle. So even if the light remains constant, there are going to be other factors that will force dormancy, and then it won't grow. So just remember that in the summer, if it's not growing, it's definitely a light problem. But in the winter, you have to analyze things a little bit more because it could be because of the dormant phase. What I would do in that case is I would wait to make any adjustments until the spring when we can confirm whether or not it's actually the no or slow growth that's caused by light. So you can also look at when they develop long internodes. So an internode is the space between the nodes, and we have a little video right here. The longer that space is, that just means that your plant is pushing out a vine in order to try and reach the sun. So the further those internodes are, the more energy it's trying to save in order to produce that leaf. So it's producing a longer internode to get closer to the sun, so then it can expend the energy to produce a leaf that will actually take in the sun's rays for photosynthesis. Now, if you also have smaller than normal leaves, this is where so it can happen both ways. Some plants will get smaller than normal leaves, and other plants will get bigger than normal leaves in order to try and actually maximize the amount of light that they're getting. So depending on the plant, you may need to look it up, what happens when that plant is exposed to less light than it needs to photosynthesize properly, and the research should tell you whether they'll have smaller than normal leaves or larger than normal leaves. Now, this one's a main indicator, so pale green stems or foliage. So if you know what color your plant is supposed to be, and it's looking a little pale or awkward, just like people do when they're sick, then that could be an indicator that there's not enough light. And the reason why is because it's only producing the amount of chlorophyll it needs to produce photosynthesis based on the amount of energy it's getting. So boost the amount of light, boost the amount of chlorophyll production, and then you'll get greener leaves. And the last indicator is the lower leaves of your plant are starting to get yellow and droop. So this is actually something normal that happens in a plant's life cycle. But if all of a sudden all of your lower leaves start to rapidly die off, you know that something is wrong, and one of those things could be not enough light. So how do we measure light? So there are a whole bunch of different units that we can measure light, but the most common unit of measurement is the foot candle. It's used by lighting professionals to calculate light levels in businesses and outdoor spaces, and it helps inform us where we can put plants where they will be at their best. So a foot candle is actually defined as the illuminescence on 1 square foot surface from a uniform source of light. And when they were originally trying to measure and standardize and quantify light measurements, that uniform source of light was produced by a candle. So right now we have these advanced light meters that we can use to measure the number of foot candles at a specific space. So remember that as you go further away from your light source, your total foot candles will go down. So the illuminescence that the leaf will see will go down. So light meters are amazing. They're fairly cheap. You can get them almost anywhere. Amazon, Home Hardwares, nurseries sometimes carry them, but they are an invaluable tool. And now on the next page, I'll actually tell you ranges for that light measure for different types of plants, so it'll actually make sense. Now, which grow lights are best? So we prefer LED lights. They're low heat, energy efficient, and they are artificial grow lights, and they are way less wasteful than the old like halogen or chemical lights that we used to use. So LED technologies are customizable, so you can look for lights that are specifically labeled full spectrum horticultural LED grow lights. Now, if they say full spectrum LED, they could work as well, but horticultural lights specifically have that yellow wavelength taken out because we really don't need it for our plants to survive. You can also, the horticultural lights will also have a red-blue spectral ratio, and it'll be optimized for tropical plants, as a for instance. So I am personally brand agnostic when it comes to grow light manufacturers, but LED is the way to go. Because you can get a wide selection of the wavelength that you want. Again, we're looking for full spectrum, and you can find different intensity factors based on the amount of power that is going to be pushed out, and the amount of energy that that light is going to travel with. LEDs are also just cheaper to run. So the upfront cost might be a bit higher, but the technology is becoming more accessible, so the price is coming down. But LEDs are definitely the way to go, and you can get some really, really, really cheaply at different stores because they sell them in packs now. So as a for instance, now again, I'm not touting this brand above others, but I can get 6 Barina LED lights for $75. Unfortunately, it's on Amazon, but you know, you do what you have to do to continue our plant care habits. And finally, what the heck is bright indirect light? So this is one of my biggest pet peeves as a plant seller, because I often see people telling other plant sellers, telling people that they need to put their plant into bright indirect light. But who the heck knows what this means? Because it'll be different to anyone you ask. It's a qualitative measure. So if I think of bright indirect light, I personally am going to be looking at those plants on the next slide that will be in the medium light range. So I believe it's 400 to 800 FCs, so foot candles. But other people will say, okay, well, you need to put it behind a sheer curtain, or you need to put it just slightly back from your window or off to the side of your window. Bright indirect light is an absolutely useless measure for tropical plant light requirements. So what I would do is I would ask the person how many foot candles that it needs. Or if they don't know, I would go and look it up in the handy dandy chart that I have on the next slide. How do you measure light? So we use light meters. And light meters are, so basically they will measure the amount of light that is in a specific space and a specific time. So as you move that away from the source of light, that will change exponentially. Because of the way that the light to energy formulation is, because of the math, you're going to notice that your light will change. As you increase your distance, the light energy will decrease exponentially. It's not linear, is what I'm saying. So we use measurements like foot candles or, so we use a measurement called foot candles, which is basically if you have a candle that's 1 foot away from where you're measuring the light, it basically, we use foot candles or lumen or foot candles is the most common, and it's what most light meters use. So this is actually kind of like a cheat sheet for the different levels of light you need for different varieties of plants. So we've got low light, which is 50 to 100 foot candles of light. Very few plants are low light plants, and we hesitate to put that label even out there because a lot of plants that are called low light are actually medium light plants that will survive in those low light conditions, but they won't thrive. Medium light, 100 to 250 foot candles. So these are things like your aglaonema, your syngonium, your dracena, ZZ plants, all of the ones that you traditionally think people would call low light. Now, your higher light plants, these are your more common houseplants. So African violets, alocasias, anthuriums, begonias, philodendrons. These ones are ones where you're going to, in the summer, put them right in your window. Okay? Put them right in your window. And then in the winter, you're going to want to supplement them even a little bit, even if they're going to go dormant. Just to get it within that range. And then very high light, this is where you're going to need artificial light supplementation pretty much the entire time that you are growing your plant. So how far away should my grow lights be from my plants? Now it depends. Like I said, the intensity of light decreases the farther it has to travel. So you're looking to optimize your light based on what plant you actually have. Group your plants based on their light requirements. So if you have multiple types of plants, you're going to place them on higher and lower shelves, closer or farther away from light, until you hit the sweet spot by measuring with your light meter. So you can see here, the light cheat sheet will tell you what types of light you're going to be looking for. So if we have just a standard full spectrum grow light, for succulents, you're going to want to place that light within 2 to 4 inches above the top of the succulents in order to get that 800 foot candles that are required for them to do well. Now, for plants like philodendrons, which are considered high light plants, you can increase that distance by 4 to 6 inches from the top of the canopy. I know you're thinking this is super, super close. How are we not going to burn our plants? As long as the plant leaf isn't touching an LED light, LED lights tend not to get hot, and so that's going to make sure that you're not going to be burning your plant leaves. Now, young plants and new leaves can burn from light even if they're not touching the light. That's just because they're more sensitive. They don't as efficiently use the light energy, and sometimes the light energy is too much for their needs for photosynthesis, so it causes them to burn. So you're going to have to move your plant until it's hardened off. How long should my grow lights be on? So it depends. You have to consider the total amount of light available to your plant during the day. So that includes the intensity of light available and the total time of exposure. Very high light plants prefer the light to stay on longer, so 18 to 20 hours a day. Plants with lower requirements are in the 14 to 16 hour range. But you also need to live comfortably with your plants. And your plants shouldn't be a burden to you, and they should fit into your lifestyle. And that includes the lights and the peripheral equipment that go with them. So set your grow lights based on your bedtime and the sunrise, and that will give your plants the best opportunity to thrive while maintaining your sanity. You can use plug-in timers to automatically turn lights off and on, and that will also help you become the best plant parent possible. All right, so the last topic is using nature to solve problems. Now, this I'm talking about in context of fighting disease and pests. So at Sweet Life Flora, we only use organic options. Of course, with all of these options that I'm saying here, aside from the beneficial insects, there are synthetic options as well. It's just the problem with synthetic options is they often come with an environmental footprint that isn't something to be proud of. So we try to stick to organics, and we make sure that what we're using on our plant is something that we can be proud of and something that our plant might naturally be exposed to in its life out in the tropical rainforest. So this is what we use. We use neem oil, which is a natural extract from a neem tree. Neem trees are native to India and South Asia, and what neem does is it contains a suite of chemicals called liminoids, which are endocrine disruptors for insects. So what that means is these liminoids are chemically similar to the hormones in an insect's body. And these false hormones will trick an insect's life cycle. So larva or pupa can't mature. Or it will mess with the reproductive cycle, rendering the adult sterile. It's also got a systemic effect if you treat the soil. So not only would you protect the outside of your plants by spraying your plant leaves down, but you can also water with it. So if you treat the soil, the plant will uptake these liminoids into its stem and leaves via the roots. And any unsuspecting insect that takes a bite on that plant leaf, because the water that contains liminoids will be sucked up through the stems and out to the leaves, any unsuspecting insect will munch on them and bye-bye insect. So neem oil is very, very great. But here's the problem. It's a generic pesticide. It doesn't just target one insect. It may also affect pollinators outside and any beneficial insects that you're going to use to treat your plants. So if you use neem oil, you're not going to use beneficial insects to treat your plants. You also will never use neem oil outside, and it's actually a banned substance in a lot of countries for use as an outdoor pesticide unless specifically asked, because it can affect pollinators. Something else that we use is a bacteria, a naturally occurring bacteria that we isolate and concentrate, called BTI, or Bacillus thuringiensis subspecies israelensis. And it took me a lot of practice to get that. BTI is what you use outside to treat standing waters. It kills all the larvae of mosquitoes, so you don't get mosquitoes. It comes in a form called mosquito dunks or mosquito bits, and that's what we use to treat for fungus gnats, for instance. But it's really great at killing a lot of different larvae species of houseplant pests. And then, of course, we use beneficial insects. Beneficial insects are amazing because we are literally fighting nature with nature. So insects from that tropical environment that would normally eat the pests that are going to hurt our houseplants, we can introduce them into our indoor environment and create that cycle of life that will reduce pest infestations on our houseplants. So we can use nematodes, ladybugs, predatory mites, predatory beetles, or even lacewings to do this. And I'm going to talk about that for the most common houseplant pests. So these are the most common houseplant pests. Aphids. We have all had an aphid or two, or an aphid problem outside. Aphids are actually really, really easy to treat on indoor plants as well. Now, aphids are endemic to, I would say, 99% of environments in the world, unless it is too cold to have them. So you can't help but bring aphids inside from outside periodically throughout the growing season. So the best way to get rid of them and to even preventatively treat them is by using neem oil. Now, remember, you can't use beneficial insects and neem oil together because neem oil is a general pesticide. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to focus only on beneficials or only on neem oil. So the beneficials that are great for aphids include ladybugs, which are generalists, so the Hippodamia convergens species of ladybugs, not Japanese beetles. You're going to have to learn to tell the difference. Ladybugs are great. They'll go and they'll eat all of the aphid larvae. Lacewings are the same. They're also generalists, so Chrysopella carnea is the species you're looking for. There's a variety of parasitic wasps, generally not something you want to bring inside, but who knows? I have had lacewings and ladybugs inside, and they do a great job. And another one is a species of Aphidoletes, or midges. Again, you probably don't want those inside, so stick with your ladybugs. Ladybugs are not only pretty, but they are really great for your houseplants. Now, mealybugs in the next picture. So the first thing you want to do with mealybugs, these things look like the fuzzy end of a Q-tip. You want to wash the plant down. They're not stuck onto the plant very well. So you're going to take the plant in whatever pot it's in, hold the soil down with either like a paper towel or your hand, and then wash the plant down. Even rub down the foliage, making sure as much of those white fuzzy things are off your plant. Now, with whatever's left, whatever mealybugs are remaining in the nooks and crannies of your stems and your offshoots, you're going to take a Q-tip with rubbing alcohol and desiccate any of the living mealybugs. Now, that only gets rid of the adults. The problem is that there are still larvae and pupae that are in the soil or in the plant. So you can use neem oil, and that will get rid of it, because remember, it's got this systemic effect. It will go up and into the plant to kill the larvae or the pupae, or it can kill the adults when they actually start to suck the juices from the leaves. But if you want to use beneficials, again, your ladybugs are a really good option, as well as your lacewings. And then there's also a beetle called a mealybug destroyer beetle. Yes, that is its common name. Cryptolaemus montrousieri is your mealybug destroyer beetle species, and it will just eradicate all of the adults, actually stopping that life cycle right in its tracks. And as those larvae and pupae will come out, the beneficial insect will stay alive. So as long as there's still food, your beneficials will survive. Now, if you're worried about bringing creepy crawlies into your house, don't worry too much, because you're going to, as soon as the pest problem is gone or is at a low enough population, your predatory or beneficial insects will actually start to die off, and you won't need to worry about them being in your environment anymore. The next houseplant pests that we're going to talk about are scale and spider mites. So scale and mealybugs are technically kind of related because mealybugs are also scale insects. The way they attach to the leaf is very similar, and the fact that they're sucking out all the juices from the leaf makes them very similar in how they attack their host. So when we talk about scale, we want to actually remove the insect. Just like we remove the mealybug first, we want to physically remove the scale using a popsicle stick, your fingernail, whatever you can think of. It's actually really satisfying when you use your fingernail to like pop them off. It's pretty cool. You have to look for the scale in all of the nooks and crannies of the plant because they're everywhere, and they can get in between the corners in the nodes where the stem and the leaf come off at an angle, so they're a little harder to get at. For that, you might want, a Q-tip or something like that, but you're going to want to hear that squishing noise to make sure that you've actually attacked the scale. If you choose to use neem oil for your scale infestations, what I would do is I would put the neem oil on a cloth and wipe down the leaf, and use a little bit of pressure, not so that you hurt the leaf, but that you make sure that you get all of the scale insects and the residues from them off of the leaf. The residues from scales can actually attract like a sooty mold, it's kind of like a brownish gray mold onto your plants. So you don't want that either. If you're going to use beneficial insects, there are predator wasps, which you don't want in your house. There's also a special ladybug that will attack scale called Lindorus lophanthia. These ones are a little bit different. They're a little bit different in color and a little bit different in size, but they are going to specifically attack your scale. And also the mealybug destroyer beater, the Cryptolaemus montrusieri. I'm going to get that wrong every single time I say it. It is actually going to go after your scale as well. Now, the next thing we have is spider mites. So you might see webbing on your plants, but the webbing is like connecting your plants and it's sort of on the outside of the foliage. This is probably from spiders, and spiders aren't a problem for your plant. They're actually like fairly beneficial because they will eat some pests as well. But if you look on the inside of your plant towards the base of the foliage, you're going to see a very fine, dense web if you have spider mites. Spider mites are actually one of the easier ones to get rid of once you've actually identified it. So if you use the neem oil treatment, that's just fine. You're going to want to make sure you just get all of the webbing, destroy the webbing, and then make sure that the neem oil is coating the fronts and the backs of the leaves as well as the stem. Now, for beneficial insects, there are a couple of predatory mites that will work for spider mites. So you've got the Neoscelius californicus and the Phytocelius persimilis. They're both really good. I have a preference for the Neo Californicus just because it's generally easier to find. And if you look on natural insect control, it's actually the first one that's recommended. So, and now on to the next. The next one we're going to talk about is thrips. Now, thrips are a plant parent's worst nightmare. I know a lot of people where if they see a thrip on their plant, they're going to throw their plant out because they don't want to go through the effort to actually get rid of them. It's very hard to get rid of them using neem oil or even pesticides because they have a really long life cycle for a pest. It's greater than 21 days depending on the temperature of the environment. So pesticides will work, but you need to start early when the population is low, and you need to keep applying it every 7 to 10 days until you don't see any more. It is a commitment. Now, there are two main types of houseplant thrips that you're going to see. The first is the bottom type, which is the most common. It's the western flower thrip. And the next one is the black thrips, which are echinothrips, and they're incredibly hard to get rid of because they're not endemic to most environments. They've actually they've only become fairly common in Canada in the past decade or so. And the larvae of thrips do more damage than the adults. They're incredibly heavy feeders, and they will kill your leaves faster than you can even blink. So the best offense against thrips are beneficial insects, specifically predatory mites. Now, here's the problem where it can get a little bit expensive because there's a different type of predatory mite for the western flower thrips and for the echinothrips. So for the western flower thrips, you're going to want Noceolus cucumaris. I call them Neocucumaris. They can be used as an offensive attack on an existing western flower thrip problem, or they can be used as preventative maintenance. So you can have it going in the background because it will always have a source of food, whether that is from thrips or from the larvae of other types of pests or other types of bugs that is naturally in a houseplant soil environment. Now, for echinothrips, you're going to want a different species of predatory mites, which is Amblyceus swerskii. So I call these Amblyceus, and again, they're just going to go after the larvae of your thrip, and they're going to stop that reproductive process in its tracks. Now, last but not least, we have whitefly and fungus gnats. I say fungus gnats for last, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So whitefly is one of your more rare houseplant pests, but I put it in here because it is a very common greenhouse or nursery pest, which means you can bring it into your house unknowingly. So what I would do is I would always preventatively treat with neem oil or a beneficial insect, a predatory mite called Amblyomyrmex limonicus. Or there's another specialty ladybug as well called a Delphastus catalinae. But because whitefly is it's not as common, I would just treat with neem oil right away before you even put your plants into quarantine. It gives your plants the best chance of survival. Now, if you treat with neem oil, when can you treat with beneficial insects? I usually say that if you've got neem oil in your soil and you've been watering with it, you want to wait at least 2 watering cycles before introducing beneficial insects. That just makes sure that it's like out of your soil, because all of your plants are going to be planted in pots that have drainage, right? So that you're not collecting too much water in the soilless mix. That's when you can, so 2 watering cycles after, you can put on beneficial insects. But if you're only treating with neem oil that is on the leaves, usually all you have to do is spray down the leaves and you can right away put your beneficials on. So again, I said last but not least for fungus gnats, because fungus gnats are endemic everywhere where it's warm enough for them to produce. So in Canada, I always tell people, you will never ever have 0 fungus gnats in your plant collection. There will always be a low baseline, and you'll always see 1 or 2 of those little flies around. But here's the thing. It's when that population gets too big that you're going to want to start treating for fungus gnats. Now, I use a 3-stage approach. You can use neem oil. Absolutely. But you're going to be using a lot of neem oil, and you're going to be using it continuously and never ever stopping and never ever missing a beat with it. What I like to use instead, though, is this 3-stage approach of beneficial insects. Now, I do this, or beneficial insects or beneficial bacteria. Now, I do this because this is also a preventative treatment for a lot of your other pests as well. So 2 birds, 1,000 pest stones. So you've got your BTI that you can use, so your mosquito bits or your mosquito dunks that we talked about in the beginning. You'll dilute them in water and then you'll water with it, and that will put that beneficial bacteria into the soil to kill all the larvae and pupae of fungus gnats, and even of some thrip species, as well as some spider mite species, anything that might have larvae in the soil. Then I'm going to use nematodes. Now, these nematodes work in conjunction with this bacteria. So you're going to look for Steinernum fellatiae. And you can actually buy these on Amazon as well, because you can use them in your garden. These are entomopathogenic nematodes that you put in your soil. They're the truest of all generalists because they go after the larvae of fungus gnats, and they'll go after the larvae of almost any of your standard houseplant pests that are in the soil. Now, the way that they do their job is they actually carry a toxin or a bacteria that in their body that is going to completely destroy the larvae. So what happens is the nematode will bite onto the larvae. It will transmit that bacteria or that toxin over to the larvae, and the larvae will eat itself from the inside out. It's the thing of nightmares. It's kind of cool though. And you can also use standard ladybugs as well. So the Hippodamia convergens are wonderful for getting rid of adult and larval fungus gnats. Like I said, you can use pesticides or neem oil as well, but you have to keep up with applications. Or you can also, in this picture here, I show you what yellow sticky cards look like. You can actually buy them on Amazon, you can buy them at your local nursery, and they can catch the adults. And I use them to monitor my fungus gnat population. So you stick them in the soil or you stick them on a shelf next to your plants and you look to see how many fungus gnats collect on them. Fungus gnats are drawn to the color yellow, so they're going to actually stick themselves to the yellow sticky card, and you can count the number that you have over a set period of time. I'll usually leave it out for 24 hours, see the number of adults that I have. If it's between 1 and 3, I won't do anything. But if I get higher amounts, then I'll start to treat for fungus gnats because I know it's going to become a problem. So that was a lot in a little bit of time, but as usual, I'm available at any time that you want to ask any plant questions on all of the socials, so Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads at Sweet Life Flora, and even on YouTube. You can email me at info@sweetlifeflora.ca. When we open our store at the end of 2024, you can come and drop in Moncton if you're in the area. Or if you want plants or fun merch, for now, you can get it on our website. So thank you so much. This has been Advanced Houseplant Care. Please enjoy the rest of your Advanced Therapeutic Horticulture course. It's going to be amazing, and the more people we can get trained around the world, the more people will know about horticultural therapy. Thank you.